President Biden was on 60 Minutes and was asked about the possibility of setting up a humanitarian corridor to assist those in Gaza. Let's take a listen.
Are you asking Israel to establish a humanitarian corridor in that area or get humanitarian supplies?
Yes, our team is talking with them about that and whether there can be a safe zone. We're also talking with the Egyptians, whether there's an outlet to get these children and women out out of that area at this moment. But it's hard.
You would like to see a humanitarian corridor that allows some of the 2 million Gazans out of the area.
Yes.
You would like to see humanitarian supplies brought into Gaza?
Yes.
So you do not agree with the Israeli total siege of the Gaza Strip?
I'm confident that Israel is going to act under the rules of war. There's a standards that democratic institutions and countries go by. And so I'm confident that there's going to be an ability for the innocents in Gaza to be able to have access to medicine and food and water.
Would you support Israeli occupation of Gaza at this point?
I think it'd be a big mistake. Look, what happened in Gaza, in my view, is Hamas and the extreme elements of Hamas don't represent all the Palestinian people. And I think that it would be a mistake for Israel to occupy Gaza again. But to going in and taking out the extremists, the Hezbollah is up north, but Hamas down south is a necessary requirement.
So he says he's confident they'll follow the rules of war. Of course, as I've already said, they're not. So I don't know why you would have that confidence. The thing that drives me crazy, I mean, it's interesting. He says, I think it'd be a big mistake if they occupied Gaza. Indications are that they do not want to reoccupy Gaza. So we'll see what happens there. But you know what drives me crazy, Saagar, is this like feigned impotence. Like, well, we want to. It's just really hard. Well, if you actually wanted to, the United States of America has tons of leverage in this situation. I mean, just like with Ukraine, when, we would love it if they didn't strike in Russia, and we've asked them really nicely, but there's not any willingness to actually put the force of U.S. policy carrots and sticks behind any of these words, which makes them completely empty and meaningless.
Yeah, I think it's a huge problem, and it actually reflects also the bipartisan consensus here in Washington, which is really unable to think for the future. You laid out also as well with the Israeli side. So they're like, okay, we're going to destroy Hamas. And I support that. I think Hamas deserves to pay. But you know what? So what about day two? We never had that plan in Iraq.
That's right.
They have to have the same plan in Gaza. And we tried occupying Iraq, didn't work. We tried building a democratic system, that didn't work either. It ended up backfiring spectacularly. We tried decapitating AQI, Al-Qaeda in Iraq. We killed Zarqawi, mission accomplished. Oops, then we created ISIS, and that took over all of Iraq and Syria. 40th order consequences exist. I'm not saying Israel can do nothing, but they're going to really have to, if they had a plan to decapitate Hamas and then truly engage in some sort of diplomatic process which led to political resolution of the entire thing, I'd be like, okay, that seems reasonable. But we also know that the current government, and probably the populace at this point after suffering the terrorist attack, doesn't support that, which means we're going to be in a years-long embroilment just like we were in Iraq. The other problem is that the White House right now is facing so much pressure from the pro-Israel politicians and really democratic sentiment, let's also be honest, that they are putting things off the table that in the future they may want to actually call for. You flagged this one in particular, calls for a ceasefire called, quote, repugnant by White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre. Here's what she had to say.
What is the president's message to members of Congress who seem to be equating the Hamas terror attack with actions that were previously taken by Israel?
Look, here's the thing, and which congressional members?
Well, there have been some members of Congress who have called for a ceasefire, and they have not gone as far as backing the administration's call for support for Israel.
So look, I've seen some of those statements this weekend, and we're going to continue to be very clear. We believe they're wrong. We believe they're repugnant, and we believe they're disgraceful. Our condemnation belongs squarely with terrorists who have brutally murdered, raped, kidnapped hundreds of Israelis. There can be no equivocation about that. There are not two sides here. There are not two sides. President Biden has been clear on where he has stood. You heard from him directly today. You heard from him also on Saturday on this. There's been multiple statements from this president, and he's taking action to provide additional support to ensure that Israel has what they need to defend themselves.
So, question from Phil Wegman there specifically.
Right.
What do you think of these calls for a ceasefire?
Yeah.
And she says they are repugnant, and we believe they are disgraceful. To call for a ceasefire, repugnant and disgraceful. Now, put that in context with what Biden is saying there about, oh, we want the innocent civilians and we're concerned about, and we don't want a reoccupation, humanitarian corridor, et cetera, on one hand. And on the other, they're saying anyone who would even say, hey, stop the violence, repugnant. And it's not just that, by the way. This is the official policy. This wasn't some just like Karine Jean-Pierre messed up and she didn't get the question right or the answer right or whatever. Put this up on the screen. Huffington Post had this originally. Washington Post has now confirmed it. The State Department sent out a memo warning diplomats no Gaza de-escalation talk, and they gave them specific language that they do not want to appear in any communications. They wrote that press materials should not include 3 specific phrases: de-escalation or ceasefire, end to violence or bloodshed, and restoring calm. So any talk of peace or ending the violence and bloodshed, officially, the U.S. government's policy is that is off the table.
I think that the major issue is that they see this as calling for negotiation or something like that with Hamas. And I think that there is a very easy middle ground of why they will regret, I believe, in the future is that, and what we're going to talk about very soon in geopolitics, but I'll mention here, is that the message is being received loud and clear across the Arab world. From MBS in Saudi Arabia and Riyadh to the Qatar, the Emir, to Iran and the Ayatollah, which is that and Egypt actually in Cairo, that the United States is co-signing whatever Israel wants to do. And whatever Biden may say, actions speak louder than words. Right. Behavior itself is a language. Whenever you do nothing, then that sends a very clear signal. And this is reigniting really like a complete, we have not seen the Islamic world this united, really, since probably the invasion of Iraq against us. And by unequivocally siding with Israel and by not actually drawing any sort of nuance or leaving things open in the future, we absolutely invite possible escalation in the future terrorist attacks against us, but more importantly, sentiment across the Arab world against us. And we're watching this really unfold as President Biden's Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, is finding himself really not as welcome as he once was in the region.
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. Let's put this up there on the screen. But Anthony Blinken trying to recreate the shuttle diplomacy famously done by Henry Kissinger. In the last 72 hours, he's visited Israel, the West Bank, Jordan, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi, UAE, Saudi again, Egypt, Jordan again, and Israel again on Monday. This all comes, before a possible visit by President Biden. If we can put the next one, please, up there on the screen. Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, has invited President Biden. We will see whether President Biden does show up in some sort of show of support. Obviously, it'll be kept under wraps.
Yeah.
He actually canceled a visit to Colorado today, Krystal. Usually these trips are, shrouded in secrecy, and we'll find out when he lands in Tel Aviv or something like that.
I saw this morning, Channel 12, which is Israeli television, they're reporting that they're making preparations for a Wednesday or Thursday visit. So it's not confirmed. We'll see what happens, but it looks like Biden may be heading to the region as well. But let's talk a little bit about the reception that Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been getting in some of these countries. So this is from the Washington Post reporting, just came out this morning, so we don't have an element for it. But in Riyadh, Saudi ruler, MBS, kept Blinken waiting overnight. There was a meeting that was supposed to happen in the evening. Crown Prince did not show up till the next morning. Very intentional. Once the meeting began, MBS stressed the need to stop the military operations that claim the lives of innocent people. They're talking about the Israeli offensive, and lift the siege of Gaza that has left the Palestinian territory without water, electricity, or fuel. That is according to the Saudi summary of the meeting. Crown Prince also called for a halt in the current escalation in the conflict, direct contradiction of U.S. policy, which has backed Israel to pursue its maximalist goal of eradicating Hamas. Similarly, chilly reception in Egypt with Sisi, who took note of, I don't know if you remember, we played Antony Blinken's comments when he arrived in Israel saying, I am here as a Jew. Sisi says, you said you are a Jewish person and I am an Egyptian person who grew up next to Jews in Egypt. They have never been subjected to any form of oppression or targeting. Not true, but anyway. And it has never happened in our region that Jews were targeted in recent or old history. Also not true. Yeah. Blinken responded to Sisi saying, I come as a human being who is appalled by Hamas atrocities. But Saagar, you took particular note of what a diplomatic faux pas it was that Blinken made here in Israel.
I was debating talking about this because I know it's so sensitive, but I will because clearly it's ignited a firestorm in the Middle East, which is Henry Kissinger, whenever he was in the midst of Israel negotiations at the height of the Yom Kippur War and all throughout his tenure while trying to bring a solution to the crisis, always emphasized a neutral party in his shuttle diplomacy to try and make sure that the Arab states did not view him as like some sort of, quote, Jewish plant. Not my words. That's what he was trying to avoid the appearance of. And he famously told the Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir, quote, Golda, you must remember, first, I am an American. Second, I am Secretary of State. Third, I am a Jew. She famously responded, quote, Henry, you forget in Israel that we read from right to left. It was a great quip, and it's famous for her wittiness, but the emphasis that he was trying to make all throughout his shuttle diplomacy was, I am here on behalf of President Richard Nixon, who said some problematic things, I think, about Jews, as we all found out whenever the recordings came out. The point, though, being that he always led with, I'm here as a representative of the United States and a neutral arbiter who wants to try and bring this to a close as an ally of Israel, but also an ally of actual balance in the Middle East. I think that Antony Blinken, by going to Israel first, by leading with that, and which I can, of course, understand on a human level from being raised, being told the stories of persecution, he did not understand that it would ignite both offense and conspiracy all across the Arab world. And I was telling you this earlier. The thing is, in 2006, the Arab world did not have as much social media. And we already saw the impact of social media during the so-called Arab Spring, Islamist winter, whatever you want to call it. The point, though, is that now in 2023, everybody's got data and everybody's got WhatsApp. This stuff flies around all across the world. There are 2 billion Muslims on the planet. And the emotionality of the Palestine issue, of Jerusalem, of the Al-Aqsa Mosque is at a 10 out of 10 in terms of what it ignites. As we've all watched, there's a lot of Muslims all across the world and even in the West have taken to the streets. So really what I think we're watching is that the Arab states, both from Blinken's rhetoric, from Biden's actions, and everything in the last week, are like, okay, they're 100% taking Israel's side. They're not even trying to listen to our perspective. And we're watching as the entire Arab world, from Cairo, don't forget this, Cairo is the second largest recipient up until Ukraine of U.S. aid. We have paid these people $80 billion over the last, I think, 70-something years, specifically as a counterweight to Israel and to try, there's a lot of legacy of it from Oslo and negotiations and all those things in the past. The point, though, is that this is supposed to be a friendly regime. And to have our Secretary of State slapped across the face, effectively, rhetorically, in a meeting like this, in a public, was a direct signal to the rest of the Arab world. And I also think of some small d democratic sentiment where people are furious, I think, with Antony Blinken for that. Rightfully or not, I'm just trying to explain how a lot of people there are going to internalize a comment like that.
Also, when you lead with your religious identity, you instantly pour fuel on the fire of what is already a very sectarian conflict. And that is the polar opposite of the direction that we want to go in. If you want to preserve any credibility as some sort of a go-between, a negotiator, an actual diplomat, you have to try to maintain some semblance of neutrality. Another thing you should keep in mind about Sisi, he is no Islamist. He's been jailing a bunch of Islamists in Egypt. So for him to take offense in such a way that he, as you said, sort of like smacks Blinken in this very public rebuke is quite noteworthy. Egypt also obviously, you know, a critical actor in terms of if we're actually serious about some sort of a humanitarian corridor, we're going to be negotiating directly with them. And Egypt has historically played a really critical role as a negotiator to try to achieve ceasefires and calm between these two parties. So, you know, huge misstep there from Blinken, and night and day between before you had the Abraham Accords under the Trump administration. You had this new effort at Saudi normalization with Israel under the Biden administration. The idea being we're just going to pretend like these Palestinians and this whole little issue over here does not even exist. Those days are long gone.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that is the big takeaway about U.S. policy and how it's being received.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.